Imagine walking into a room full of millionaires and powerful people, and they all laugh at you. That's exactly what happened to Amara, a young black girl who dared say, "I speak 9 languages." The crowd roared with laughter, and the richest man in the room mocked her. But what happened next left every single person in shock, and turned the tables on the millionaire himself. "This is a story you won't forget. I speak 9 languages," the young black girl said, her voice steady and proud. The entire room froze for a split second before erupting into laughter. High-pitched chuckles, arrogant smirks, and dismissive whispers filled the grand ballroom like an echo chamber. To them, her words were impossible, ridiculous even. At the center of the crowd sat Mr. Richard Harrington, a millionaire investor whose reputation for arrogance was as famous as his wealth. His sharp gray suit, diamond cufflinks, and polished shoes screamed money and power. He leaned back in his velvet chair, tilted his head, and smirked with a cruel amusement. 9 languages? He repeated mockingly, his deep voice cutting through the laughter. "My dear, even scholars, professors, and world travelers struggle with 3. And you expect us to believe you've mastered 9. The crowd roared again, some shaking their heads, others whispering about how bold or foolish the girl was to make such a claim. But through it all, Amara didn't flinch. She stood in the middle of the glittering hall, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, golden pillars, and rows of elegantly dressed guests. Her simple navy blue dress was modest compared to the sparkling gowns and tailored tuxedos around her. But there was something about the way she stood, her shoulders squared, her chin slightly raised, that made her presence impossible to ignore. Her dark brown eyes didn't dart nervously, like most people's would under such scrutiny. Instead, they locked on Harrington with a calm fire, the kind of gaze that said, "Laugh all you want. I know what I'm capable of." The room belonged to Harrington. At least it usually did. He was known as the man who controlled conversations, who silenced anyone with just a look, who always had the last word. But tonight, for the first time in years, he had met someone who didn't shrink before him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrington said with exaggerated politeness, raising a glass of wine in his hand, "I think we all deserve some entertainment this evening. Our guest here, what's your name again, dear?" "Amara," she answered simply. "Ah, yes, Amara. She claims to speak 9 languages." 9? He held up his fingers dramatically, grinning at the audience. "Well then, perhaps we should give her a chance to demonstrate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some leaned in with curiosity, others with skepticism, but all eyes were now fixed on Amara. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. The chandeliers glistened, the air thick with tension. Everyone waited to see if the girl would stumble, stutter, or finally admit she was bluffing. Harrington certainly expected it. After all, in his world, bold claims without wealth or status were nothing more than empty words. But Amara didn't tremble. Instead, she took a slow breath, the corners of her lips curling into the faintest smile. "You want me to prove it?" she asked, her tone calm yet commanding. Harrington leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "Yes," he said, his smirk widening. "Prove it." The moment felt electric. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the room. The wealthy elite, so used to talking over waiters, staff, and interns, were suddenly silent before this young woman. They weren't used to being challenged, and certainly not by someone who didn't look like them, dress like them, or come from their world. As the silence stretched, Amara's mind flashed briefly to her childhood. She remembered the countless nights studying in dimly lit libraries, the endless afternoons repeating words and phrases, until her tongue ached, the hours of listening to conversations she barely understood until the sounds turned into meaning. She remembered the faces of her parents, who sacrificed everything so she could learn, even when they had nothing. She wasn't just standing here to prove herself. She was standing here for them. And so, with her heart steady, Amara repeated firmly, "I speak 9 languages, and I will show you." The crowd erupted again, some laughing, some gasping, some whispering to each other. But this time, something was different. Her unwavering confidence made it harder to dismiss her. There was no nervous hesitation, no trembling voice. She sounded believable. A woman in the crowd leaned over to her husband. "What if she's telling the truth?" she whispered. Harrington heard it, and it annoyed him. He needed to crush this moment, to prove once and for all that this girl was nothing more than an attention seeker. But deep down, a small, unwelcome thought tugged at him. What if she's real? He brushed it off quickly. "All right, then," Harrington announced loudly, raising his voice to silence the whispers. "Let's make this interesting. If you truly speak 9 languages, Amara, then tonight, in front of everyone here, you'll demonstrate them all, one by one." The crowd murmured with excitement, some already pulling out their phones to record. It wasn't every day you saw a young intern stand up against a millionaire in such dramatic fashion. Amara simply nodded. "I'll do it." Her confidence made Harrington narrow his eyes. He had expected her to shrink away, to mumble excuses, to disappear into background like every other nobody he dismissed in his lifetime. But this girl was different. She wasn't backing down. The air in the hall shifted. The laughter had faded, replaced by anticipation. Guests who had mocked her a few minutes ago were now leaning forward, curious. Could she really do it? Or was this just another case of someone trying to climb into a world they didn't belong in? Amara knew what they were thinking. She could feel their doubt pressing in on her like a heavy weight. But instead of crumbling, it fueled her. She wasn't here to impress Harrington or even to prove them wrong. She was here because she belonged. And in that moment, as she stood alone in the center of a glittering room filled with the powerful and wealthy, Amara made a silent vow. "Tonight, I will not just speak 9 languages. Tonight, I will make them listen." The ballroom lights had dimmed. The once bustling crowd of millionaires, scholars, and world leaders was finally dispersing. But for Amara, the echoes of the night lingered like music she would never forget. She walked slowly toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor. In her hand, she clutched a small notebook, the same notebook she had carried since she was a child. Its pages were filled with words in every language she had studied, from English idioms to Mandarin characters, from Arabic proverbs to Swahili poetry. That notebook had been her greatest treasure. Tonight, it had become her weapon. The millionaire's last glance. As she passed through the grand hallway, Amara caught sight of Harrington one last time. He was seated alone, a half-empty glass of champagne on the table before him. His face, once smug and confident, now carried a bitterness he couldn't hide. Their eyes met for just a brief moment. Harrington looked away quickly, ashamed. Amara did not gloat. She did not sneer. She did not need to. Her victory wasn't about humiliating him. It was about proving to the world and to herself that knowledge and perseverance were stronger than arrogance and wealth. She whispered softly under her breath, as though speaking only to herself. "Respect cannot be bought. It must be earned." And with that, she walked on. The ride home. Outside, the night air was crisp and cool. A limousine, sent by Sheikh Omar himself, waited for her. As she climbed inside, Amara's phone buzzed endlessly with notifications. Social media posts, interview requests, invitations. It was overwhelming. But for a few moments, she silenced it all. She leaned back in the plush leather seat, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe. In her mind, she saw her father again, his weathered face, his gentle smile, the way he used to encourage her when the world told her no. She remembered the nights when the electricity went out, and she had studied by candlelight, the mornings when she would practice pronunciation into a cracked mirror, the endless sacrifices, the tears, the determination. And now, all of it had led to this moment. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not of sadness, but of triumph. A call from the Sheik. As the limousine turned onto the quiet city streets, Amara's phone rang. It was Sheik Omar. "Amara," his voice boomed gently through the speaker, "I meant what I said tonight. Tomorrow morning, I will send a team to meet you. We will plan your future together. You will travel, you will learn, and you will teach others what you know. The world needs more bridges, and you are one of them." Amara's throat tightened. She had dreamed of opportunities like this, but never thought they would come so soon or in such a powerful way. "Thank you, Your Excellency," she said softly. "I won't let you down." The Sheik's voice warmed. "I know you won't." The world awakens to Amara. By dawn, Amara's story had already gone viral. News outlets across the globe ran headlines like, "Young black girl stuns millionaire with her gift of languages." "Nine tongues, one voice. Amara inspires the world." "Knowledge triumphs over arrogance." Clips of her flawless Mandarin, her emotional speech in Arabic, and her calm composure against Harrington's mockery had been replayed millions of times. She had become not just a sensation, but a symbol. Students around the world began posting videos of themselves learning new languages, tagging them with hashtags like #BeLikeAmara. Teachers shared her story in classrooms. Parents told their children about her resilience. Amara had become more than a girl. She had become an inspiration. The legacy begins. Weeks later, Amara stood in front of a massive auditorium filled with students, journalists, and leaders. She was no longer just the girl who spoke 9 languages. She was now a keynote speaker, a rising cultural ambassador, a voice for education. As she looked out at the audience, she smiled. "I was laughed at," she began, her voice steady and powerful. "I was underestimated. But I learned something important. When you believe in yourself, when you work harder than anyone else, and when you use knowledge as your weapon, no one can silence you." The crowd erupted in applause. And somewhere, watching from the shadows of the internet or the back of the room, Harrington heard those words too. They burned him, but they also taught him something he would never forget. The power of humility, and that, my friends, is the story of Amara, the girl who turned laughter into applause, mockery into respect, and a challenge into a lifetime of opportunity. She didn't just speak 9 languages. She spoke the universal language of courage, perseverance, and self-belief. So let me ask you, how many times in your life have people laughed at your dreams? How many times have they doubted you, underestimated you, or tried to break your spirit? Remember Amara's story. Remember that no matter who tries to put you down, your knowledge, your passion, and your determination can make the world listen. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs motivation, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that remind us of what's possible. Because one story can change the way you see the world. And maybe the next story could be yours. The ballroom was electric. Even as the applause thundered, there was a strange silence underneath it. A silence that came from one undeniable truth. A shift had just taken place. A moment ago, Amara had been dismissed as a joke. Now, she stood as the undeniable star of the night. When the crowd finally began to settle, all eyes turned not to the millionaire Harrington, but to her. Whispers filled the room. Who is she? Where did she come from? I've never seen anyone do something like that. Amara stood poised, her posture calm and confident, but inside, her heart was racing. She had done it. She had faced ridicule, challenge after challenge, and had risen above them all. And now, doors she had never imagined were beginning to open. The billionaire's humiliation. Across the room, Harrington sat slumped in his chair, his glass of champagne untouched. His sharp jaw was clenched tight, but his eyes revealed the storm raging inside him. For a man used to being the center of admiration, tonight had been a disaster. He had tried to crush her spirit, to expose her as a fraud, but instead he had exposed his own arrogance. Guests who once clung to his every word now avoided his gaze. A few even whispered about how cruel he had looked, mocking someone so young and talented. For Harrington, the night was over. His pride was shattered. But for Amara, it had only just begun. The Sheik's offer. Sheik Omar, a man of few words but immense power, rose from his seat once more. His presence commanded silence. He approached Amara slowly, the soft sound of his steps echoing in the grand ballroom. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "Amara," he said, his voice deep and sincere, "you have done something tonight that very few people in this world can do. You have reminded us that true wealth lies not in money, but in knowledge, discipline, and humility." He glanced briefly at Harrington before continuing. "You are the kind of mind and spirit the world needs. And if you are willing, I would like to sponsor your education, your travels, and your work. Anywhere you wish to go, any language you wish to learn, any dream you wish to chase, you will have my full support." The audience gasped. This was no small gesture. Sheik Omar's patronage meant influence, access, and opportunities that could change lives forever. Amara's eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. For years, she had studied in silence, with nothing but borrowed books and online mentors. And now this? She bowed her head slightly, her voice trembling with gratitude. Thank you, Sheik Omar. I will honor your faith in me. The sheik nodded solemnly, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes there was respect, genuine respect. The world takes notice. Within minutes, word began to spread beyond the ballroom. Dozens of guests had recorded Amara's speeches, her flawless translations, her stunning Mandarin. Videos were already hitting social media, captions blazing with awe. The girl who speaks 9 languages just humbled a billionaire. History was made tonight. The future belongs to people like her. By the time the night ended, Amara's name was on everyone's lips. Reporters swarmed the lobby, desperate for an interview. Business leaders exchanged cards, eager to collaborate. Even university representatives approached, offering scholarships and fellowships. Amara, who had walked into that ballroom as a nobody, was now leaving as a rising star. The quiet victory. But in the middle of all the noise, the cameras, the flashing lights, Amara found a quiet moment to herself. She stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air washing over her. Below, the city lights glittered like diamonds scattered across the earth. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. The long nights of study, the times when she had almost given up, the cruel words from people who told her she was wasting her time. And she remembered her father, his rough hands placing a book in hers, his voice telling her that knowledge was a bridge, that one day her gift would make people listen. She smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Papa," she whispered, "we did it." The shift in power. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Harrington, once the dominant figure, was now a shadow in the corner. Guests who once gathered around him now flocked to Amara, eager to shake her hand, to hear her speak a few words in their own language. One man asked her to greet him in Arabic. Another asked her to say something in French. Each time, Amara responded effortlessly, her fluency dazzling them further. And each time, Harrington's face grew darker. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the star. He wasn't the one people admired. He wasn't the one being filmed, photographed, and applauded. He had been replaced by a girl he had underestimated. The future beckons. By the end of the evening, Amara had collected dozens of invitations, from international conferences to cultural summits. Universities wanted her to speak. Organizations wanted her as an ambassador. Even corporations hinted at offering her positions. But more than the offers, it was the respect that mattered most. No one was laughing at her anymore. No one was doubting her anymore. They saw her not as a novelty, but as a force. Amara realized something profound that night. Her journey was only beginning. The world was vast, filled with languages she had yet to master, cultures she had yet to understand, bridges she had yet to build. And now, she had the platform to do it. As the ballroom began to empty and the night drew to a close, Amara stood tall, her head held high. She had arrived at this event as just a girl with a dream. She was leaving it as a symbol of perseverance, talent, and hope. And though the road ahead would not be easy, she knew one thing for certain. She would never again be underestimated. The thunderous applause for Amara's story hadn't even fully died down when Harrington struck again. "Enough of this drama," he barked, his voice sharp with desperation. His face was flushed, not with heat, but with humiliation. The crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They weren't looking at him with admiration. They were looking at her. And Harrington, a man who had built his empire on commanding every room he entered, couldn't stomach it. "If you're as brilliant as you say," he sneered, "then prove it once and for all. Speak a language you haven't yet, one that's nearly impossible for outsiders to master." The crowd murmured anxiously. What would he throw at her now? Then, with a cruel grin, Harrington declared, "Mandarin Chinese. Let's see you handle that. In front of all of us." The room went still. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Mandarin, The language of tones, of characters, of centuries of culture wrapped in complexity. Even seasoned linguists struggled with it. And Harrington knew this. He wanted to see Amara stumble, falter, finally fall. A hush swept through the ballroom. The tension was so heavy it could be felt in every corner. Amara stood silently for a moment. Her dark eyes flickered with something unshakable, not fear, but resolve. She thought of the nights she had spent scribbling characters by candlelight, her fingers cramped, her back aching. She thought of the countless times she had recited tones, only to be corrected by her online mentors, forcing her to start again. She thought of her father's last words. Don't stop before the world sees what you are capable of. Slowly, she stepped forward. Her calm presence alone seemed to silence even the faintest whispers. Mandarin, she said softly. Very well. The billionaire's grin widened, convinced he had finally cornered her. But then Amara began to speak. Her voice flowed like water, crisp and melodic, each tone placed with precision. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your warmth and patience today. I am truly honored to be here with you to share my story. Gasps rippled across the room. Several Chinese business delegates sitting at a nearby table sat bolt upright, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them leaned forward eagerly and responded in Mandarin, testing her fluency. Hey, your Chinese is so good. Have you lived in China? Without hesitation, Amara smiled and replied, No, I've never been to China. I taught myself at home, practicing every day, persevering every day, because I believe language is a key to connecting the world. The Chinese delegates erupted into applause, their voices overlapping with praise. Perfect pronunciation. She speaks better than some exchange students. The audience erupted, astonished and thrilled. Phones rose again. Flashes of cameras lit up the room. The atmosphere shifted entirely. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was history in the making. Amara, the girl they had laughed at, was now commanding the respect of international leaders, business moguls, and scholars, all with the strength of her voice and the knowledge she had fought so hard to gain. Meanwhile, Harrington's grin had vanished. His smug confidence dissolved into a mask of disbelief. His lips parted, but no words came out. His mind scrambled for excuses, for some way to twist what he was witnessing. But there was none. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard it. A young black girl, whom he had mocked as insignificant, had just demonstrated a level of mastery he could never dream of. The applause grew louder, thunderous, almost shaking the hall itself. Guests were on their feet, clapping and cheering, their admiration bursting forth like a wave that couldn't be held back. Even Sheikh Omar, who had been silently observing until now, stepped forward. His deep voice cut through the cheers, calm but commanding. Amara, he said, what you have shown us tonight is not just knowledge. It is discipline, perseverance, and greatness. You embody the very spirit of what true leadership means. He turned to Harrington, his gaze sharp as steel. And as for you, sir, mocking someone's gift does not make you powerful. It only reveals your ignorance. The crowd roared in approval, some even booing Harrington openly. For the first time in his life, the mighty billionaire looked small, powerless, defeated. Amara bowed her head slightly in gratitude, then turned back to the audience. Her voice was humble, yet strong. I didn't come here to prove I am better than anyone, she said. I came here to prove that anyone can rise above their circumstances. That no matter where you come from, no matter how much or how little you have, perseverance can take you places you never imagined. Her words resonated deeply, cutting to the glitter of the ballroom and striking straight at the hearts of those listening. Guests were no longer clapping just for her talent. They were clapping for her journey, for the hope she carried, for the inspiration she had become. And Harrington? He sank back into his chair, defeated, his pride crushed under the weight of the very girl he had tried to humiliate. The tide had turned completely. Amara hadn't just passed his final test. She had conquered it. The ballroom was still buzzing from Amara's flawless Arabic. Guests whispered to each other in awe. some recording videos, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief. But amid the growing admiration, Harrington's voice cut through the noise like a bitter wind. "Fine," he snapped, trying to regain his authority. "She speaks well enough, but anyone can memorize. For all we know, she's rehearsed these lines. What makes her so special? Why should we believe she's truly mastered these languages, and not just putting on a performance for applause?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Some frowned at Harrington's persistence, but his words planted a question. How did she learn all this? It was a fair doubt. Mastering even 2 or 3 languages required years of dedication. 9? That sounded almost impossible. All eyes turned back to Amara. She stood gracefully, but inside her chest, she felt a flicker of vulnerability. She could prove her skill again and again, but unless they understood her journey, some would never fully believe. Taking a quiet breath, she lifted her chin. Her voice, though soft, carried across the hall. "You want to know how? Fine, I'll tell you." The room fell silent. Even Harrington folded his arms, leaning back with a smug expression, expecting her to stumble. But Amara's gaze didn't waver. "I wasn't born into wealth. I didn't have tutors or private schools or travel the world on vacation. My family was poor. Some days, we didn't even know if we'd eat dinner. But we had something many others didn't, my mother's faith in education." She paused, her voice trembling slightly at the memory. "My mother used to say, 'Amara, the world may try to take everything from you, but the knowledge you put in your mind and heart, they can never steal.'" She believed language was the key to opportunity, the bridge to the future. And so, even when we couldn't afford electricity, even when we studied by candlelight, she pushed me to learn. The audience listened intently, their expressions softening. Phones lowered as people leaned in, drawn into her story. "I started with English," she continued, "not because it was my first language, but because it was the one spoken most in schools and books. At first, I struggled. My classmates laughed at my accent, at the way I stumbled through words. But I didn't stop. Every night, I practiced. Every morning, I whispered English phrases to myself in the mirror until they felt natural." Her eyes glistened, but her voice grew stronger. Then came French. I found an old French textbook in a library that was closing down. Most of the pages were torn, but I copied them by hand. When others played outside, I stayed in and studied. I listened to French radio on a crackly old device my uncle gave me, even if I only understood 1 word out of 10. The crowd was riveted now, hanging on to every word. Harrington's smug smile faltered slightly. "German came next," Amara said, a small smile forming. "Not because I wanted to, but because I met an elderly German couple who lived in our neighborhood. They didn't have children of their own, so when they saw me studying, they decided to help. They spoke to me every afternoon, correcting my mistakes, teaching me songs and stories from their homeland. They became my grandparents in spirit, if not in blood." A murmur of admiration spread through the room. Amara's story was more than talent. It was resilience, community, determination. But the hardest, she admitted, was Mandarin. I couldn't afford lessons. I had nothing but free apps and borrowed books. Still, I told myself, if millions of children in China can learn it, why can't I? I practiced every day, writing the characters over and over until my hands cramped. People thought I was crazy, but I kept going. She paused, her voice softer now. "When my father passed away, I almost gave up. The weight of grief, the responsibility of helping my mother, it felt like too much. But I remembered his last words to me. He said, 'Amara, one day the world will see what you are capable of. Don't stop before that day comes.'" The audience was silent. Some wiped their eyes, deeply moved. Even those who had doubted her felt their hearts stir with respect. "And so," Amara concluded, her voice filled with quiet pride, "I kept going. I learned Arabic from the Quran teachers at the mosque near our home, Spanish from a neighbor who was kind enough to teach me after work, Swahili from my grandmother, who sang it to me in lullabies, Italian and Portuguese from online pen pals who believed in me more than I believed in myself. 9 languages. Not because I had privilege, not because it was easy, but because I refused to let my circumstances define my future. Thunderous applause erupted. Guests rose from their seats, clapping and cheering with genuine admiration. This wasn't just talent. It was grit, sacrifice, and relentless determination. One woman in a glittering emerald gown leaned toward her companion and whispered, "Do you realize what this means? She's not just a prodigy. She's living proof that brilliance can come from anywhere, that no amount of wealth can replace true perseverance." Even Sheikh Omar, still standing at the edge of the crowd, pressed his hand to his heart in respect. But Harrington's jaw tightened. He could feel the tide of the evening slipping beyond his control. He had invited Amara onto the stage to humiliate her, to expose her as a fraud. Instead, he was the one being exposed as arrogant, shallow, and incapable of recognizing true greatness. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. His pride demanded one last stand. "Touching," he said loudly, clapping his hands once in mock applause. The sound was cold and sharp, cutting through the warmth of the moment. A fine little sob story. But speeches don't prove skill. You've charmed them with words. But let's see if you can back them up. 8 languages remain, girl. Let's not get distracted with sentiment. The audience groaned at his cruelty. Several even booed under their breath. But Amara only smiled faintly. She had told her story not for Harrington, but for everyone else. For those who needed to hear that resilience could triumph over ridicule. And now, she was ready to prove him wrong again. The ballroom had transformed. Moments ago, it had been a stage for Harrington's arrogance, a place where his laughter silenced others. But now, after 3 languages flawlessly displayed, French, German, and Mandarin, it was no longer his arena. It was Amara's. She stood in the center of the glittering hall, like a star commanding the night sky, her presence undeniable. Phones were raised, eyes were wide, and admiration replaced mockery. Still, Harrington refused to surrender. His smile had grown thinner, his voice sharper, but his pride would not allow him to be humiliated by a young black girl in front of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city. "Fine!" Harrington barked, raising his glass once again. "You've shown us 3 languages, but you claim 9, and I won't be satisfied until we see the rest. Let's go beyond Europe and Asia. Let's test something truly complex." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk searching for prey. Finally, he smirked. "Arabic. Let's see if you can handle that." The audience gasped softly. Arabic was a language of elegance and depth, but also of daunting difficulty. Its script flowed like art. It sounds unfamiliar to most Western tongues. Even those who attempted to learn often failed, lost in its grammar and vocabulary. Surely this, Harrington thought, would be her downfall. From the far side of the ballroom, a tall man in a flowing white thobe and a golden-trimmed bish stepped forward. His presence was commanding yet graceful, and his dark eyes glistened with quiet intelligence. This was Sheikh Omar Al-Faisal, a Saudi businessman known for his success in oil and real estate investments across the globe. The crowd parted respectfully as he approached, his movement steady, his aura dignified. Harrington's grin widened. "Excellent," he said. "Sheikh Omar, would you do us the honor of testing this girl's so-called Arabic?" Omar inclined his head politely, then turned to Amara. His face was unreadable, his tone formal as he greeted her. "Peace be upon you, my daughter. Do you understand me?" A ripple of anticipation coursed through the room. All eyes swung to Amara, waiting for her to falter, to stutter, to give herself away. But instead, Amara placed her hand gently over her chest, bowed her head slightly in respect, and replied in fluent Arabic. "And peace be upon you, Sheik. Yes, I understand you perfectly. It is a great honor to meet you here tonight." Gasps burst across the ballroom. Her voice carried the rhythm of the language beautifully, her pronunciation sharp and precise. Even the smallest inflections, those that reveal whether a speaker truly understood Arabic or was simply mimicking, were flawless. Sheikh Omar's eyebrows lifted slightly. He studied her carefully, then asked, his words faster this time, Tell me, how do you see the role of language in uniting different peoples? It was a test of thought, not just vocabulary. But Amara didn't hesitate. She answered with grace. I believe language is a bridge that connects hearts and minds. When we speak another person's language, we don't just share words. We show respect for their culture and history. And that respect opens doors to understanding and cooperation. The room erupted in applause. Not polite claps, but thunderous, heartfelt applause. Some guests even rose from their seats, clapping above their heads. The words themselves were moving, but hearing them delivered in Arabic made them almost poetic. Sheikh Omar smiled warmly now, his sternness melting into admiration. He raised his hands slightly, addressing the room in English. "This young woman," he said, his deep voice carrying easily, "has not only mastered our language, but she understands its soul. She speaks with respect, with wisdom, with dignity. Such skill is rare, such heart rarer still." The applause grew louder, echoing to the golden ballroom like rolling thunder. Amara bowed her head slightly in gratitude, though inside her chest her heart raced. She had passed another test, one that Harrington thought impossible. But Harrington was furious. He gripped the edge of his chair, his knuckles white. His carefully crafted smirk had all but vanished now, replaced by a tight scowl. He could feel the room slipping further and further away from him. People weren't looking at him anymore. They weren't laughing at his jokes or waiting for his approval. They were looking at her, Amara, the girl he had mocked. He rose to his feet once again, forcing his voice to sound controlled, though the edge of anger cracked through it. "Impressive," he spat. "But let's not get carried away. This is still only 4 languages. She claims 9, remember? We have much to see before we decide if she's truly as extraordinary as she pretends to be." But the crowd was no longer with him. The applause hadn't fully died down, and conversations buzzed excitedly. Words like genius, incredible, and unbelievable floated through the air. For the first time in a very long time, Harrington was not the center of attention. And for the first time in her life, Amara was... She stood tall in the ballroom center, her eyes shining, her spirit unbroken. She had faced ridicule, pressure, and impossible challenges. And each time, she had answered with brilliance. But she knew the night wasn't over, because Harrington would not stop until he had either broken her or destroyed himself trying. The applause for her flawless German was still rolling through the ballroom when Harrington rose from his seat. His smile was tight now, forced, like a mask that barely covered his irritation. Twice, Amara had passed his test. Twice, she had silenced the laughter and turned the crowd against him. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. He raised his hand dramatically, commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "our young intern has shown us she can handle European languages. Very well, but Europe is only a corner of the world. If she truly speaks 9 languages, she must handle something far more demanding." He paused for effect, scanning the crowd before delivering his challenge. "Mandarin." The word sent a ripple through the room. Guests exchanged wide-eyed looks. Mandarin wasn't just difficult. It was infamous for its complexity. 4 tones to turn a single word into 4 entirely different meanings. A slight slip of the tongue could transform mother into horse. It was a language that humbled even the brightest learners. Harrington smirked again, confidence seeping back into his posture. This was the test she couldn't possibly pass. From near the back of the ballroom, a man in his 50s stepped forward. He wore a sleek black suit with a jade-tie pin that gleamed under the lights. His presence commanded respect before he even spoke. "This," Harrington declared, gesturing proudly, "is Mr. Li Wei, a respected entrepreneur from Beijing. Surely, our young friend here won't be able to fool him with rehearsed phrases." Mr. Li nodded politely and turned to Amara. His expression was neutral, unreadable, as though he'd already decided this would be nothing more than a short experiment. The room fell into silence again. No one moved. No one breathed. Every eye was locked on Amara for a heartbeat. She simply stood there, hands clasped calmly in front of her, eyes focused. Inside, though, She remembered the years of struggle, the endless tones, the tongue-twisting sounds, the mistakes that once left her frustrated to tears. She remembered sitting in front of her old laptop, replaying Mandarin lessons late into the night, whispering phrases over and over until they rolled off her tongue naturally. This was her chance to show it had all been worth it. She bowed slightly to Mr. Li, then began speaking in fluent Mandarin. Mr. Li, it's an honor to meet you. I've heard about your company's achievements in the renewable energy sector, and they are truly admirable. Gasps rippled through the room. The tones were perfect. The rhythm flowed naturally. There was no hesitation, no fumbling, no trace of uncertainty. Mr. Li's eyebrows lifted, his composure cracking ever so slightly. He replied in Mandarin, his words quick and deliberate, testing her further. Hey, how long have you studied Chinese? Can you explain in Mandarin the opportunities for cooperation between America and China in technology? Harrington smirked from his chair. This was too advanced. Surely she couldn't answer. But Amara didn't miss a beat. She responded with clarity, confidence, and eloquence. I've studied Chinese for many years. I believe that in technology, there is tremendous potential for cooperation between China and the U.S., especially in artificial intelligence and clean energy. If both countries can respect one another and strengthen communication, the future will be very bright. The ballroom erupted, not in laughter this time, but in thunderous applause and cheers. People stood from their seats, clapping, whistling, even shouting her name. Phones were raised higher now, recording every second of this unbelievable moment. Mr. Li, a man not easily impressed, broke into a wide smile. He clapped his hands firmly and said in accented English, "Outstanding, truly outstanding. Her Mandarin is not only fluent, but thoughtful. This young lady is remarkable." The cheers grew louder, echoing against the golden walls and chandelier-lit ceiling. Harrington's smirk shattered. His jaw tightened, his hand gripping his wine glass, so hard that for a moment it looked like it might snap. He had thought Mandarin would be her downfall. Instead, it had elevated her to a level even he couldn't control. The people in the room weren't just entertained anymore. They were inspired. They weren't just curious. They were in awe. And Amara stood in the center of it all, calm and composed, though her heart beat furiously in her chest. She had dreamed of moments like this, imagined them in the quiet corners of her life when no one believed in her. But now it was real. She glanced at Harrington, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to gloat or boast. Her success spoke louder than any words could. Harrington, sensing the crowd slipping further from his grasp, rose again, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Very well," he said, his voice sharp. "She speaks Mandarin. But let's not forget, she claims 9 languages. We've only heard 3. But the crowd was no longer laughing with him. They weren't sneering or mocking. Instead, they were eagerly waiting to see what Amara would do next. And Amara? She was ready. Because this was no longer about proving Harrington wrong. This was about proving herself right. The applause from the French demonstration still echoed faintly in the ballroom when Richard Harrington's face hardened. He hated it. He hated that the spotlight had shifted away from him and onto a girl, and in turn, no less. For years, he had dominated these rooms with his money, his arrogance, and his sharp tongue. But now, all anyone could talk about was her. He tapped his fingers against the stem of his wine glass, eyes narrowing at Amara. She had surprised him once, but he was determined to expose her. "All right," Harrington said, raising his voice to command the room once again. "French is impressive, yes, but far too common. Anyone with a half-decent education can pick it up. Let's make this interesting." The crowd hushed, waiting for his next move. "Who here speaks German?" he called out. Almost immediately, a stern-looking man with a square jaw and neatly combed hair stepped forward. His tailored black suit fit him like armor, and the way he walked suggested discipline and authority. This was Herr Klaus Weber, a German banker known for being as precise and strict as the systems he managed. Klaus adjusted his tie and gave Harrington a polite nod before turning to Amara. His piercing blue eyes studied her carefully, as though scanning her for weaknesses before even speaking. "Shall we?" Harrington said, gesturing smugly. "Let's see if the young lady can handle German, a language far less forgiving than French." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. German wasn't known for its softness. Its grammar was complex, its sounds harsh and challenging. Surely this would trip her up. Amara took a slow breath. She remembered the countless nights in her small apartment, huddled by the glow of a desk lamp, repeating German words from battered library books. She remembered recording herself, listening to the cadence, correcting every mistake until her tongue could twist around the language with ease. Now, all that practice would either shine or shatter. Klaus spoke first, his words sharp and deliberate. "Guten Abend. Wenn Sie wirklich nun sprechen, Dan Erklerin Sie mir bitte die aktuelle Wirtschaftssituation in Deutschland." "Good evening. If you really speak 9 languages, then please explain to me the current economic situation in Germany." The room leaned in closer. This wasn't a simple greeting. Klaus had deliberately asked her something advanced, something that required not just vocabulary, but understanding. Harrington smirked. This was exactly what he wanted, to watch her stumble. But Amara didn't stumble. Her response was steady, confident, and flawless. "Guten Abend, Herr Weber. Naderlich. Die deutsche Wirtschaft ist momentan stark von den Energiepreisen beeinflusst. Viele Unternehmen müssen ihr Strategien ändern, wettbewerbsfähig zu bleiben. Gleichzeitig hat die Automobilindustrie neue Chancen durch Elektromobilität." "Good evening, Mr. Weber." "Of course. The German economy is currently heavily influenced by energy prices. Many companies have had to adjust their strategies to remain competitive. At the same time, the automobile industry has found new opportunities through electric mobility." A hush fell over the ballroom. Her grammar was perfect, her pronunciation precise. She wasn't just speaking German. She was speaking like a German, addressing the question thoughtfully, showing knowledge of current affairs. Klaus's eyebrows shot up. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, a slow smile spread across his usually stern face. He nodded firmly, impressed. "Ausgezeichnet. Deutsch ist bemerkenswert. Ich hat nicht gedacht, dass der Mann außerhalb von Deutschland so flüssig sprechen kann." "Excellent. Your German is remarkable. I would not have expected someone outside of Germany to speak so fluently." The audience broke into applause again, louder than before. People began clapping in rhythm, cheering her name. The shift was undeniable. Amara wasn't just surviving Harrington's challenges. She was owning them. But more importantly, the room's perception of her was changing. No longer was she just the intern. No longer was she the subject of mockery. She was becoming the center of admiration, the girl everyone wanted to know more about. Harrington clenched his jaw. His plan was backfiring. Twice now, she had silenced the laughter. Twice she had turned doubt into awe. He could feel control slipping through his fingers, and that was something he could never allow. "Impressive," Harrington muttered, forcing a stiff smile as the applause died down. "But German is still European. Perhaps she's memorized a few useful tongues for travel. Let's see how she handles something completely different, something far outside her comfort zone." He raised his voice again, commanding the crowd. "Who here speaks Chinese? Mandarin, perhaps?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Mandarin was one of the hardest languages in the world, tonal, complex, and unforgiving. Even seasoned learners struggle with it after years of practice. Surely, this would be her undoing. All eyes turned back to Amara, waiting to see if the girl who had stunned them with French and German could continue her streak. And as she prepared for the next challenge, her heart raced, but not with fear, with anticipation, because she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. The laughter in the ballroom had not yet completely faded when Richard Harrington decided to strike the first blow. He leaned forward in his chair, his silver hair glinting under the chandelier lights, and with a theatrical wave of his hand, he called out, "Well then, let's not waste everyone's time. Who here speaks French?" From the far side of the room, a tall man in a tailored suit stepped forward. His accent was unmistakable even before he spoke. "I do," he said in polished English, his voice deep and confident. "Jean-Luc Dupont, investment banker from Paris. The crowd murmured with approval. Everyone knew Jean-Luc. He was powerful, intimidating, and sharp. If Amara faltered even once, Jean-Luc would notice instantly. Harrington grinned like a predator that had just spotted its prey. He turned back to Amara. "All right, young lady, impress us. Speak to Monsieur Dupont in his native tongue. And don't just recite greetings or tourist phrases. Hold a conversation." The room went dead silent. Every glass of champagne paused midair. Every whisper ceased. All eyes fell on Amara. Her palms tingled with nervous heat, but she refused to let it show. She had practiced for moments like this, not for Harrington, not for crowd, but for herself. She had promised years ago that she would never let fear silence her voice again. So, with a calm smile, she turned to Jean-Luc and said in perfect French, "Bonsoir, Monsieur Dupont. C'est un honneur de vous rencontrer. J'ai lu vos articles sur le marché européen et j'ai trouvé vos analyses particulièrement brillantes." "Good evening, Mr. Dupont. It's an honor to meet you. I've read your articles on the European market, and I find your analyses particularly brilliant." Jean-Luc's eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly in surprise. The accent was flawless, the pronunciation crisp, the rhythm natural. It wasn't the broken French of a beginner or the stiff tone of a textbook learner. It was the kind of French spoken by someone who lived and breathed the language. The room gasped. A few jaws even dropped. But Amara wasn't finished. She continued seamlessly, her words flowing like music. She asked Jean-Luc about his thoughts on the recent changes in European banking policies. She referenced a famous French economist, demonstrating not only her command of the language, but her knowledge of French culture and intellect. Jean-Luc's face lit up with genuine delight. He chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief before replying in French. "Incroyable. Votre français est impeccable, mademoiselle. Même à Paris. Je n'entends pas souvent un accent aussi pur." "Incredible. Your French is impeccable, miss. Even in Paris. I don't often hear such a pure accent." The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but with astonishment. Applause scattered across the ballroom like sparks catching fire. People leaned closer to their neighbors, whispering furiously. "Did you hear that? She's fluent. That wasn't memorized. That was real conversation." For the first time that evening, the energy in the room shifted. Doubt began to crumble. Harrington's smirk twitched ever so slightly, but he quickly recovered, raising his glass as though nothing had happened. "Not bad," he said dismissively, though his voice lacked its usual edge. "French is common enough. Many schools teach it. Surely this was just practice." But everyone could tell he was rattled. Jean-Luc, however, was not so quick to let the moment pass. He turned to the crowd and said loudly in English, "This young woman speaks my language better than many of my colleagues in Paris. She deserves respect." A wave of approval surged through the room. Heads nodded, voices murmured in agreement. Amara stood silently, her face calm, though inside her heart hammered against her chest like a drum. But it wasn't fear, it was pride, relief, and something stronger. For the first time, the crowd wasn't laughing at her. They were listening to her. She glanced at Harrington, meeting his eyes steadily. His arrogant amusement was dimming, replaced by something colder. He didn't like losing control of the room. "You see," Amara said softly, addressing no one and everyone at once, "when you dedicate yourself to learning a language, you don't just learn words. You learn a culture, a history, a way of thinking. It becomes part of you." Those words, simple but powerful, resonated with the audience. Many of them, despite their wealth, had never bothered to learn more than a few phrases in another tongue. To see a young girl, without their money or privilege, mastering not just one but 9 languages, it was humbling. But Harrington wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and said with sharp edge in his tone, "All right, fine. You've proven you know French. But let's not celebrate just yet. 9 languages is still a ridiculous claim. Let's see how far you can really go." The crowd shifted again, sensing the duel was far from over. But the balance had changed. Harrington no longer had the full weight of the room behind him. Doubt had crept in and curiosity had taken over. As Amara stood tall in the center of the ballroom, she knew this was only the beginning. One test down, 8 more to go. But she also knew something Harrington hadn't realized yet. Every time he tried to humiliate her, he wasn't weakening her. He was giving her the stage she had always deserved. It all began at the International Business Conference in New York City, a gathering so grand that people described it as the Olympics of wealth and power. The venue was nothing short of breathtaking, an enormous ballroom inside a 5-star hotel, its ceiling adorned with chandeliers so large they looked like falling stars captured in glass. The polished marble floor gleamed under the golden lights, and every corner of the room carried the weight of influence. Here, the world's most powerful investors, CEOs, and entrepreneurs mingled freely, glasses of champagne in their hands, designer watches glittering under the spotlights. It wasn't just a conference. It was a marketplace of opportunities, where one handshake could mean millions and one careless word could destroy reputations. Amid the luxury and the chatter, Amara looked almost invisible. She wasn't wearing a designer gown like the other women. Her navy blue dress was simple, clean, and practical, the kind of outfit chosen by someone who thought about comfort before fashion. Her shoes weren't heels worth thousands. They were plain flats that allowed her to move quickly across the ballroom floor. Because Amara wasn't a guest. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't even supposed to be standing among the billionaires and millionaires who filled the room. She was there as an intern, assigned to assist her company's representatives by carrying documents, taking notes, and, most importantly, helping with translations whenever needed. And yet, destiny had a way of pushing her into the spotlight. She stood near a small group of businessmen when she first caught attention. A Japanese investor had been struggling to explain his proposal, and the Americans he spoke to looked utterly confused. Without hesitation, Amara stepped forward and began translating fluently in Japanese, her tone respectful, her delivery smooth. The investor's eyes lit up with relief, and the Americans suddenly understood everything. Business moved forward, hands shook, and everyone seemed satisfied. For Amara, it was nothing special. She'd done this many times before, helping clients, bridging conversations. But for the others watching, especially men like Richard Harrington, it was unusual. To them, a girl so young, so ordinary-looking, speaking another language so effortlessly was already a surprise. That's when Harrington, curious and arrogant, decided to make a scene. He stepped forward, towering over her with his broad shoulders and polished smile. His presence commanded attention, and soon the nearby crowd began to circle around, sensing that something entertaining was about to unfold. Harrington loved these moments, where he could show off his power by belittling others. "Young lady," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness, "how many languages do you think you can actually speak?" Amara didn't hesitate. Her answer was quick, clear, and confident. 9. The response hit the room like a thunderclap. At first, there was silence, shocked silence, before the laughter came crashing in like a wave. Guests clutched their stomachs. Some shook their heads. Others whispered loudly, "Impossible. She must be joking." No one her age could do that. Harrington chuckled, shaking his head. 9 languages? My dear, you do realize even world-class professors can't manage that. You expect us to believe you've achieved what geniuses fail at. Amara stood her ground. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She had learned long ago that confidence wasn't about not feeling fear. It was about standing tall in spite of it. "Believe what you want," she said softly, her words almost swallowed by the noise of the crowd. But there was something in her tone, steady, firm, unshaken, that silenced him just enough for her next words to cut through. "I speak 9 languages, and I am not afraid to prove it." Now the room buzzed with energy. The atmosphere shifted from mocking laughter to curious tension. Could she really do it? Could this young intern really speak 9 different tongues? Harrington leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. His smirk widened. He lived for these moments, humiliating people who dared to step out of their place. "Well then," he said, his voice echoing across the ballroom, "if you insist, let's put on a little show. If you truly speak 9 languages, tonight you'll demonstrate them all for everyone here." The guests murmured with excitement, some already pulling out their phones to record. After all, this was entertainment. A girl standing up against one of the richest men in the room. But for Amara, it wasn't entertainment. It was a test, and she wasn't about to fail. She looked around the room, her eyes catching glimpses of disbelief, amusement, even pity. But she also saw something else, curiosity. A few people were watching her not with laughter, but with interest. They wanted to see what she could do. And deep down, Amara knew something Harrington didn't. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a gamble. This was years of sacrifice, of self-teaching, of nights spent with second-hand dictionaries and free online courses, of practicing with tourists in her neighborhood, of refusing to give up even when everyone told her it was useless. She didn't just speak 9 languages. She had earned them, word by word, syllable by syllable. So she lifted her chin, steadied her breathing, and said with unwavering confidence, "Bring anyone you like. I'll speak with them." The room fell silent again, anticipation thick in the air. The game was set, the challenge accepted. And for the first time that night, Richard Harrington's confident smirk faltered just a little.